I am now in the mindset that much preparation and the opportunity to study together is the opportunity to honor somebody. And the way to honor somebody we care about is through study. In our tradition, a chavruta is the name of a person you study with. A chavruta means a friend. And so this morning, as we now begin Psalm 82, I dedicate today's learning to Julia Lupton. I see Julia and I smile because she's a person that evokes goodness, and she's been a companion for the Shakespeare Festival at UCI and other kinds of just moments of learning and enjoying. So it makes me happy, Julia, to have you as part of the regulars in the class and to dedicate this morning's learning to your presence. So again, it's a treat to honor as we begin our study. I also want to bring to mind Larry Wayne, Mimi's husband and a beloved congregant who has his yahrzeit today. Psalm 82 is, like all the Psalms, to be read as layers. And the three main layers are the biblical author, which is often a mystery as to who the biblical author was and what the message is. That's subject to multiple possibilities, often because there is no clear indication within the psalm, and because the psalm is a poem, allowing for multiplicity of valences of understanding. The second layer is the understanding of the rabbis through the last 2,000 years. What verses they extract is often placed into liturgy that creates its own understanding, or how they understand the words and the message. All the more for rabbis who were in exile. Many of the Psalms are written as exilic prophecies. And last, we as readers come to the text with the words for us as the focus and are challenged to see how we may find the words relevant in our own lives. This psalm, I think, on election day, all the more, is riveting because it is strong words against misuse of power. You'll see as we unfold. It's a short psalm. It's only 8 verses. I like the middle words. The middle words of this psalm are Lo yadu velo yavinu. They did not understand. They did not know. They did not understand. This is a chastisement of judges, people given authority by community. But here will be an interesting presentation, and that is, who are the judges that God, this is mostly God speaking this psalm. All but 2 verses 2 to 7, is God's speech condemning the misuse of power. But who are these judges? Are these judges celestial beings, or are they human judges, or both? I'm going to read the psalm, and then I will share with you a little bit about henotheism versus monotheism, meaning the belief in many gods and only one supreme God, a biblical contemporary model of reading text, versus what I find riveting, which is dealing with God's call for justice at the center of a world. Last comment, and then I'll start rolling. This is the psalm for Tuesday, for today. Every Tuesday, the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah 31a, says you should read Psalm 82. And some say it was read even in the time of the temple on Tuesdays. Why? On Tuesday, that's the third day of creation, when all the waters were gathered, allowing for dry land. In the Talmud, Tamid, they'll say that the platform for recognition of God is land, but more on the flip side, as we'll see in this psalm, justice is the foundation of community. And that's also the link, that there is no foundation, there is no dry land. All will return to chaos if there is no justice justly administered. And so, Psalm 82, I chose the phrase, "You are divine beings." Benjamin Segal entitles it, "Judges Judged." A psalm of Asaph. God stands in the congregation of El, in the midst of divine beings. God pronounces judgment. Quote, "How long will you judge perversely, and the faces of the wicked elevate? Selah. Judge the lowly and orphan, poor and destitute. Act righteously. Rescue the lowly and needy from the hand of the wicked. Save them. They do not know and do not understand. In darkness they walk about, tottering are all the foundations of the earth. As for me, I had said, divine beings are you, children of the Most High are all of you. Nevertheless, as a mortal you shall die, and as one of the authorities you shall fall." Unquote. Arise, God, judge the earth, for you possess all the nations. And so as our pattern, we'll go back through it now from the top a little bit more slowly. Asaph is the writer of 12 Psalms, one of the 10 authors named explicitly amidst the 150 Psalms. And this is the second to last one. Asaph in particular is a poet who uses echoes of other parts of the Bible. And he writes often with the use of double entendre. The big double entendre here will be, here in verse 1, who are these Elohim? Normally, the word Elohim is God's name. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim created. It's the third word of the Bible. And yet, well, let me say, Elohim is often understood as the name of God, that's job description, namely powerful one, authority. Creator God is the God demonstrating power. And therefore, elsewhere in the Bible, the word Elohim will be used for human beings also. For courts, Exodus 21:6, Exodus 22 verses 7, 8, and 27, and later 1 Samuel 2:25, Judges 5:8, and here in Psalms, distinctly just here in Psalm 82, but also Psalm 138:1, the word Elohim can refer to courts, can refer to judges. Again, those with godlike power, authority, are also called Elohim. And so here's the question. From the very beginning, we get the word Elohim twice. First time, Elohim nitzav, God stands ba'adat El, in the congregation of El. Now, El is also a name of God, El is the more common name of God in the Near East. The phrase Adad El, the congregation of El, this is the only time it appears in the Bible, though Benjamin Segal will point out, Nahum Sarna, a great Bible scholar, taught at Brandeis for many years, will point out that the phrase congregation of El exists in the Ugaritic Canaanite literature, so that it's a common phrase of mythology of the Canaanites. And here's the key image. The key image is people lived in times of the image of a former time is people lived with the image of kings, and a king had a court. In fact, the word in Greek for that court is pamalia. It's the origin of the word family, those who are there to serve the king of the castle. And the image of powers, you have all this retinue of advisors and people who do your work, your bidding. And we get that image in the Bible and other places. So consider the book of Job, where Satan, who's the prosecuting angel, comes to talk to God. And the image is God makes the decisions, but there are these angels who advise. Or Isaiah chapter 6, where the prophet sees God on the throne, surrounded by the six-winged angels praising the Lord of hosts. You get it in other places, just a couple to mention. 1 Kings chapter 22, Jeremiah chapter 23, the image of the court of God. And so, Adad El, the midst of divine beings, particularly by Bible scholars of a contemporary mindset, see this as that vestige of the myth of the Near East, the God with the court. It's also true for Greek gods, which is where you get, it's actually from writing about the Greek gods, that the word is coined henotheism. Henotheism is the belief that there are many powerful beings, if you will, gods with small g, and that the move to monotheism is the move from many gods, polytheism, to henotheism, a superior God, to only one God. Some Bible scholars would say this is an important psalm of God rejecting henotheism. So a little bit more background. When the Jews cross the sea, they begin to sing. And that song of the sea includes a phrase like, Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods? Mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, who is like you in splendor of holiness? No rati hiloto sefela, you are the one who creates awe. But gods, who is like you among the gods? So that would be, if it's taken literally, henotheism. Now, the modern Bible scholars would say one of the dramatic changes in Deuteronomy is a move toward monotheism, but that's part of the journey that will be an ongoing wrestle with the Israelite people and the Jewish people in the land. And so you'll get in Deuteronomy, Va'ani Elohim imadi, ki Adonai hu ha-Elohim. There is no God beside me. It is because Yud He Vav He, Adonai is the God. That's 32:39, or verse 4:35, Ein od milvado. There is no one beside him, beside God. And so a teacher and friend, Rabbi Wayne Dosick, in reading my letter about this psalm, said, we talked yesterday, this is the Bible's move, this psalm, from henotheism to monotheism. God is standing in the company of God saying, my people, these are Rabbi Dosick's words in terms of his biblical take, my people have recognized your existence, gods with small g, for the nations of the world long enough. No more, you're finished. Well, here's how Robert Alter puts it. This is focused on the heavenly court who get demoted, made into mortals. This is the transition from mythology to a monotheistic frame of reference. The end verse is the assertion of only one God over all nations. Now, Rashi distinctly, the key is verse 6. As for me, I had said, divine beings are you, children of the Most High are all of you. And verse 7, nevertheless, as a mortal, you shall die, and as one of the authorities, you shall fall. So this, verses 6 and 7, is the demotion of the angels. Why? Because the role of the angels was to make sure there was justice. One other subset of this idea is that every nation has an angel. When Jacob wrestled with the person who's also called Elohim twice, and then I saw God face, that angel is understood by the later rabbis as the angel of Yishmael, of Esau, Jacob's brother, of Esau. And so God is saying, you're getting demoted. Well, that's a biblical scholarly perspective, that this is an older psalm, still in transition, not true for all the psalms. Again, the writing of psalms can span 500, 600, 700 years in theory, even longer for rabbis of the Middle Ages. It's almost 1,000 years, for instance, from King David to the Hasmoneans. It's almost 1,000-year period, and there are attributions of psalms within that time frame. So back to this psalm. This psalm is understood by some scholars as being early, and by being early could be a transition, a vestige of the myth of the angel and the fallen angel, God demoting the other gods. And even Rashi, in terms of verses 6 and 7, France of the 11th century will say this refers to the angels who are now being told, you are to be mortal, you are being demoted. But most of the rabbis, including Rashi for the psalm and Radak, read this as dealing with human judges. So I want to read it again. I want to shift from that kind of biblical scholarship, the layers where there's a mystery of who the psalmist is, who the psalmist is necessarily addressing on behalf of God, to how I read it and how it was largely read. And I can keep one eye on the clock. This is a condemnation of the perversion of power. How long will you judge perversely? Avel means sinfully, with iniquity. Ufnei reshaim tisu, and the faces of the wicked you lift up. And that resonates with the call, Leviticus 19:15. Lo tisu avel, you say, you shall not do iniquity. B'mishpat, in judgment. Lo tisa panai dal. Here it's, don't pick up the face of the poor, v'lo tahadar panei gadol, and do not glorify the face of the mighty. B'tzedek tishmot amitecha, with justice you shall judge your people. The concept of the need for justice is central to the Bible, early and throughout. In Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, righteousness, righteousness you shall pursue. And later, the early rabbis, Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, on three things the world stands: on justice, on truth, and on peace. And so justice, again, the theme of the Tuesday psalm is that the world is founded, its terra firma is justice. How long will you judge perversely in the face of the wicked? Elevate. Judge the lowly and orphan, poor and destitute. Act righteously. God's concern is for those who lack power. Rescue the lowly and needy from the hands of the wicked. Save them. They do not know. This is in reference to the judges. They do not understand. In darkness they walk. What does this mean? In darkness they walk. The contemporary Bible scholar Dean Steinsaltz will say they operate from preconceptions. That's darkness. Not to open your eyes and see what's before you. In preconceptions, they walk about, and I see I misspelled tottering. I'll add a T. Tottering are all the foundations of the earth. That's again this image that the world rests on justice justly administered. Now verses 6 and 7. As for me, I had said, divine beings are you. This can also be understood in two ways. When addressing God is addressing judges. I have given you power to be like me, or the community has given you power to be like me. Children of the Most High are all of you. Children of the Most High is underscored by Sforno, biblical commentator, is to say, you are close to me like my children. You are intimates of mine. Nevertheless, you have abused your power, and therefore remember, you are only mortal. As a mortal you shall die, and as one of the authorities you shall fall. For when you abuse your power, you are an authority. Sarim could be understood, often translated as a prince you are, but you will fall. Nahum Sarna will say this could have been said sarcastically, verses 6 and 7. God is speaking sarcastically. Divine beings are you? It's all in the inflection. But I tend to think of it as not out of sarcasm, but out of hurt. A statement, divine beings, you are you. You have this enormous power. You are the children of the Most High. You are my intimates. Nonetheless, do not abuse that power, because you also have to know who you are, which is you are not God. As a mortal, you shall die. And if you abuse your power, your authority will fall apart. Last line, verse 8. Usually judges sit. This, kuma, matches the beginning, nitzav. Back to Asaph with echoes. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. Moses will say to the people in his closing speech, all of you today stand before God. Nitzav, nitzavim. This goes to the core message that Moses would deliver as to the legacy that enables a future. And it's pointed out that normally a judge is seated, but here God is standing amongst the council of God because God is upset and demanding immediate action. Hence, now out of quotes, the psalmist addresses God. Arise, God. Take action, God. That image of arise, we've seen it before, a call for God to act immediately. Psalm 12:6, Psalm 76, 9, and 10. But that's it. It doesn't occur that often. The call to God, arise, shafta haaretz, judge the earth, ki ata, before you, tinchal b'chol hagoyim, possess all the nations. The name of God throughout this psalm is the universal name of God. It is not the Yud He Vav He. It is Elohim. Again, emphasizing that embedded in creation itself is the need for justice, the need for those given community authority to administer it in divine-like ways, administer it as if all are seen in the image of God. And so with that, we'll stop the presentation part to allow you to react and for me to build on some of this. And so if I can see any reactions to Psalm 82, you are divine beings. I don't see any hands. Shula, my dear Canner. Go ahead, Canner Shula.
I'm unmuting myself.
Thank you.
Two things. First, you mentioned Rashi,
Yes.
who said that the angels were demoted. And I remembered from long ago studying Bereshit as a child, and that Rashi said already in the creation story, where it said that God said, Na'aseh Adam, that he explained that plural form of the word had God actually consulting with his angels about creating a human being. So maybe they were demoted, but I think even there, God was teaching us that being a dictator was not God's way. So I think that that's what they taught us at that time, that the Na'aseh Adam, God consulting with his angels, said Rashi, to show that he wasn't just ramming things down anybody's throat, but even then, God was telling his host of angels, this is how you do it. You consult with your surrounders.
So that's lovely. So let me build on Shula's mention of the creation story. Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu uchid mutenu. God says, let us make Adam a human, a mortal, in our image and our likeness. And Rashi, the important biblical commentator, will say that the plural, na'aseh, is in order to convey that, one, God has a court, the angels around God, therefore it's in the plural, and from that one can learn that God as a model monarch consults. The other thing to know in that Genesis story is later you will have what are called the Nephilim, and the fallen angels who will mate with human beings. Again, that vestige of ancient mythology that gets depowered, but yet is present in the creation story. Back to that image that Canner Shula shared of the plural. For Christians, Na'aseh is the Trinity, is God's consulting, God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And verse 6, children of the Most High are all of you, will be quoted by Jesus in the book of John, verse 10, verse 34. When Jesus is accused of calling himself the Son of God, he will rebut to say, but that's how we speak of humanity. Children of the Most High are all of you. And so back to the lens we bring to text, the piece that Canner Shula brought to the foreground, let us make man in our image, will be understood in the plural in Christianity in one way, this verse will be used in that same context. And the last, many of the commentators will say that it's the royal we. When God says, Na'aseh Adam b'tzelmenu, let us make man, is simply God speaking in the royal we, that it's one God, not necessarily consulting, because that is that whole image of God with the court became a bit unsettling later in terms of what power do you give angels. And as angels get demoted in to some degree, but not fully, in Jewish folk tradition, back to this psalm. Is this God speaking to the angels who are getting demoted, hence now you are mortal? Or is this God speaking to the judges saying, remember, you are only mortal. Don't get carried away with your authority, which is how I prefer to read the psalm.
I would say this psalm is really concentrated, and almost the whole psalm is one long quotation from 2 until the next to last verse. And even that next to last verse is a statement within the quotations, and then a kind of summing up in the last lines. And in that sense, it seems to be a unique in its structure from other psalms that we have studied.
So to build on Hal's insight, we saw this last week where there was a very long quote of God. That too is somewhat of a Soph, in which this poet hears God's voice, which lends authority to the message. It's not we can imagine that what prompts this psalm is that the psalmist sees the misuse of power by those in power, by the authorities, by the judges, by the king in the court, and comes to condemn that misuse of power so that it's a power of self-serving nature, and puts it into God's voice. It is God speaking. I will add that some take verse 7 out of the quotes. Martin Cohen did, but for most, it's within God's voice. The nevertheless, the achein, you are mortal. But that's part of what makes Psalms religious literature, and that is the world is seen as God's place, and the goal of life is to live in relationship with God, and what God demands is justice, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. It's throughout Leviticus, the holiness code, in the book of Deuteronomy, when the makeup of power in Parsha Shoftim is presented, it begins with the judges. We'll later discuss prophets and kings, and police, but it begins with judges who are the most interactive in terms of authority with people in the most immediate way, with rules for the need for judges to act justly. In this psalm, there are 2 words only that get repeated 4 times each. And that's the word God, Elohim, 4 times, and judge, which gets repeated 4 times. And the subset is 2 words that get repeated twice, only 2 words that get repeated twice. And that is dal, which means the lowly, the powerless, and rishaim, the wicked. That gets repeated twice. And so this psalm is a psalm that focuses in on judges being God-like, and the concern is against the wicked and on behalf of the lowly. That's also, what is remarkable about the weave in Psalms, in this Psalm of Asaph, is the purposefulness of how words are repeated and very selectively to convey the core message. One closing comment, and then I'll pull it together for Kaddish. Jeff, go right ahead. Last comment, and I'll pull it together.
And not comment, a question. So I'm really impressed. You can quote all the way from existentialists all the way back to Ugaritic literature. That's amazing. So this psalm actually addresses the religions of other cultures surrounding Israel. And I think we have the same problem today, where we have multiplicities of views about God and religions. How does this psalm speak to our relationship to other people's notions about God?
So the great drama of the Bible, I'm glad you asked it that way, Jeff, because I began to some degree sharing a concept that's less familiar to us, that of henotheism, not uncommon in the ancient world, of many gods, but a more powerful supreme God, versus monotheism, where there's only one God. And that is to say, the revolution of Torah, the revolution of the Abrahamic faith, was the belief that that there is only one creator God, and secondly, that the creator God cares about morality, that the creator God deeply, as a parent, is concerned with how the children treat each other fairly, and that vexes God. Nothing vexes God more than injustice. And as a parent, particularly when my children were younger, nothing could push my buttons more than seeing them hit each other or hurt each other. It would, I had no words for that. And we get that image throughout the Bible, that it's not only this all-powerful God who created the world, a world of order, a world that is good, but a world in which God seeks relationship with creation, with humans in particular, and that the world is founded on fairness and justice. And this psalm, Psalm 82, sets it apart from paganism, where people brought God offerings to curry favor for themselves. That still exists in all folk magic as part of religion. But here the message is clear from Asaph. What God demands is justice. And people will be given authority that is divine-like, but know that you are not God. Back to the first command of the Bible, I am God, you are not. And so with that, pulling this together, and again, I pause to acknowledge Julia Lupton, who, having her in the class, always elevates my presentations. And I thank you for being here to share in the learning today. And as we get ready to recite Kaddish, I bring to mind my friend and Mimi's husband, Larry Wayne. So we join with the saying of Kaddish. One second. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Bialma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. V'chayechon u'vyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shnei Rabba mevorach. Amen. Omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach. V'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal. Shemei dekudsha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Damiran bialma v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Osei shalom b'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'imru
Amen.
Amen. I thank everybody for participating today. Tomorrow is the last of the Asaph Psalms, Psalm 83. It's also the last of what are called the Elohistic Psalms, where the preferred name for God is Elohim, which was Psalms 42 till 283. It's a psalm that focuses on the history, naming 10 different nations around Israel who have done battle with Israel, including Assyria, a review of kind of Israeli history, where again, Bible commentators will put its authorship somewhere within a 1,000-year period. So we'll look forward to tomorrow, Psalm 83, which I entitle, Pursue Them with Your Tempest. So to all, thank you. Thank you for joining and sharing the learning. Be well.